This video is sponsored by Isolate, manufacturers of the mains conditioner and power cords used by a British audiophile. For more information about these and their other products, please click the link in the description. I suspect there's a fairly healthy appetite for consuming hi-fi in Sweden. It gets pretty cold there, which must give all kinds of indoor activities a boost. But producing hi-fi products? Nah, not so much. It's one of the most expensive places to live in the world. Naturally, manufacturing costs are going to be high. There are Swedish hi-fi brands, but they tend to occupy the high end. So when I discovered that Moonriver Audio hand builds amplifiers in Sweden, starting at just over 3 grand, I was intrigued. And just take a look at this thing. I think it's gorgeous. Scandinavians have a bit of a flair for design, don't they? It's about time I checked out what the Swedes have to offer. The standard Moonriver 404 amplifier retails for £3,299, but this is the upgraded reference model that sells for £4,499, undistinguishable at the front and back from its junior sibling, apart from the white font writing being replaced by gold. There are a lot of very enticing design touches to this amplifier: a combo black and wooden bezel, recessing the front panel, mirrored symmetry with 2 toggle switches and 4 polished black metal rotary dials. It's one of the best looking amplifiers I've encountered. The unit measures 430 by 135 by 390 millimeters and weighs 13 kilograms. In old money, that's 16.9 by 5.3 by 15.4 inches and 28.7 pounds. A couple of subtle LEDs illuminate upon power up. The dial on the extreme left toggles between 4 inputs, smooth in operation with a reassuring click as the input switching relays engage. The left toggle switch can be used to switch off or dim the LEDs. I prefer them fully illuminated. The inside left rotary dial will engage and disable the tape monitoring loop, and the one on the inside right is for the left-right speaker balance control. The toggle switch on the right-hand side will select between stereo and mono mode. The dial on the extreme right is for volume control. The 404 reference also comes with a nifty remote control. There are 2 phono stage and 2 DAC options available for the 404 ref. A moving magnet only for £475, moving coil and moving magnet for £549, a SPDIF DAC for £549 and a USB DAC for £799. Or you can spec the amp without any of those options. A bank of single-ended RCA connections are provided for the line level inputs, the tape loop and 2 sets of pre-outs to use with external power amps or subwoofers. The speaker binding posts are the only other external feature to distinguish the reference from the standard model. What we see here are very good quality WBT next-gen speaker terminals. Let me give you a guided tour of the internals of the Moonriver Audio 404 reference amplifier, starting as I always do with the power supply. And in the top corner we have a few components: the AC filter, fuse and soft start on power up. That's a 250 VA toroidal transformer, branded Moonriver, so it may well be a custom transformer. Some components here. And I think mounted to those heat sinks are a couple of diodes for rectification to turn the AC into DC. Some large ICs down here, which I bet are for system control. And here's the preamplifier section. And this amplifier has a dedicated power supply for the preamplifier. And they've gone to town here. There's 2 very nice Rubicon capacitors, each rated at 10,000 microfarads, and a couple of smaller Vichet capacitors, so that's very generous. The preamplifier itself is all through-hole discrete components, which is nice to see. And there we have the filtering for the power amplifier section, identical for left and right channels. You have 8 large and 2 small Vichet capacitors per side, and there's 80,000 microfarads, or at least 80,000 microfarads of filter capacitance there. Again, very generous. Now to the controversial bit. Mounted to the heat sinks are Texas Instruments LM3886 chip-based power amplifier modules. So no discrete power amplifier modules. Now you see these chip-based amplifier modules in amplifiers that tend to retail for less than £1,000, but it's unusual at this price. It's always preferable to have discrete components. They are Class AB, so it's not Class D chips, but still I can't help but feel that is a compromise that's been made due to get this to a price, because it's hand built in Sweden. How much impact that has on performance, we'll find out. And this is where a phono stage board would be mounted if it was fitted. Terminals are on the back, but I don't think the board has been fitted or it's been taken out. And that's the DAC board. Most of the components are on the other side, on the bottom, which you can't really see. But I could make out an ESS DAC chip. Couldn't tell you which one because it wouldn't tell me, but it is an ESS chip there. So I think this USB DAC is based around an ESS chip. And below that, which you can't really see, are the relays for input switching. And what I forgot to mention was the rating of this amplifier. It's rated at 50 watts into 8 ohms. So let's see how it sounds. I'm flabbergasted as to how much performance Moonriver Audio have been able to get out of a pair of LM3886 power amplifier chips. Just goes to show how much difference a whopping great power supply and a decent preamplifier section for that matter makes. And it reminds me that electronic devices such as diodes and transistors aren't much more than a powered output being modulated by the input signal. My £350 Cambridge Audio AXA35 shares the same power amplifier chips. Naturally, there are going to be some similarities to the sound signature, an expansive soundstage that has excellent depth and a tonality distinctly on the warm side of neutral. But that's where the similarities end. Don't let the price tag fool you. The AXA35 is one of the best amplifiers I've heard below £1,000. That's why I use it as a reference, but you have to pair it with speakers that are easy to drive. The Moonriver amplifier is in a different league altogether, as you'd hope at 13 times the price. The soundstage is huge with secure placement of performers. There's a lot more clarity and instrument separation. It may seem silly to some that I'm comparing an amplifier at £4,500 to one that retails for 350 quid, but there's people out there who are going to think that these two amplifiers perform similarly because they use the same power amplifier chips. They don't. There are plenty of accessibly priced amplifiers. I don't like the words budget or cheap. Anyway, there are plenty of accessibly priced amplifiers that use the LM3886 chip from the likes of SMSL. Even the Arcam A5 uses that chip. I've heard many of them, reviewed some of them, and I can tell you all the ones that I've heard don't have the grip and control over speakers that I've heard from the 404 reference. So let's up the ante. My Exposure 2510 retails for £1,950, still less than half the price of the 404 ref. Despite it being rated at a healthy 75 watts per channel into 8 ohms, it has a considerably smaller power supply than the Moonriver amp. It shows in certain aspects of performance the 404 will drive tricky speakers where the 2510 can struggle. There's less bleed through from the bass into the mid-range. It's easier to track instruments as well as vocals. But that's with difficult to drive speakers like my Proact Response 1 SEs and the Quad Revela ones. With easy loads like the bass limited £1,500 Dali Menuet SEs, it's the Exposure 2510 that delivers superior clarity. More of the micro details of a recording come through. Play Georgia on My Mind by Ray Charles, accompanied by the Count Basie Orchestra, and there's a bit more texture to the bass, subtle inflections to raise vocals, and natural timbre to some of the instruments in the orchestra. But the Moonriver 404 reference sounds bigger and more authoritative. It might not be as musically insightful as the 2510, but it's a lot more flexible when it comes to speaker pairings, which to my mind makes me feel like it belongs to the price category above. Comparisons with my £3,250 Hegel H190 are interesting. The Moonriver amp can easily match the Hegel when it comes to scale and dynamics, but the H190 has a crisper attack to notes, extracts more detail, and has a more even-handed tonality. The 404 ref reminds me a lot of the Alta IN300 that I reviewed a few months ago. A big, warm, authoritative presentation, but with some softening to the leading edges of notes. Good resolution, but not the last word in unearthing information from recordings. The £2,995 Alta IN300 is a bit of a beast, with two hefty 440 VA transformers, over 80,000 microfarads of power supply filter capacitance, and 6 MOSFET output devices per side, capable of delivering 150 watts per channel into 8 ohms. That means that the Alta will no doubt play louder, but at low and moderate volumes, I'll be very surprised if this 50 watt per channel Moonriver amplifier gives up anything to the Alta. And it has a particular sound characteristic that I think many people will find appealing. The bass is a little bit plump and juicy, but it's still very well controlled. There's some softening of sharp edges in the mid-range, but it comes across as full, not thick. And the upper mid-range and high frequencies are pulled back enough to give a relaxed presentation without sounding dull. I have to applaud Moonriver for offering the DAC and phono stage modules as options and not fitting them as standard. I don't like paying for features that I'm not going to use. Sensitive electronics that are found inside DACs and phono stages are generally better in their own chassis rather than thrown in with amplifiers, and that's the main reason why I'm an advocate for having external ones. I did test the built-in £799 USB DAC module, which performed adequately, pulling the tonality of the Moonriver amp closer towards neutral. It didn't have the sound staging, detail and refinement of the best DACs I've heard at £1,000, but it'd be hard to beat for £500. I can see people who don't want the hassle of extra boxes and wires being quite happy with it. As for speaker pairings, as long as you understand that the 404 reference is going to colour the sound in a particular direction, it's going to work well with a wide range of speakers, thanks to its very good driving capability. The synergy with my £1,500 Amphion Argon ones was excellent, the leaner tone of the speakers from Finland balancing the richer sounding Swedish amplifier admirably, as if these two brands from the Scandinavian peninsula were designed to work together. The Dali Menuet SEs, also £1,500, showed that the 404 reference had more to offer in terms of mid-range nuance, even if the Moonriver amp did lose out to my Exposure 2510 in this regard, as I commented earlier. But with my Proact Response 1 SEs, which are little gits to drive, my preference shifted to the 404 reference. It just sounded more open and in control, whereas the 2510 muddied and collapsed the soundstage. It was a similar story with the £1,800 Quad Revela ones, which are also demanding on an amplifier's power supply, although ultimately the Hegel H190 would remain my preferred permanent solution for its extra resolution and lack of coloration. The Moonriver 404 reference is an amplifier with a big personality. The distinctive looks are reminiscent of a high-quality 1970s receiver, while the retro vibe remains tastefully understated. The sound is equally flavoursome, throwing out a huge soundstage with rich beefy lows and mids and a top end rolled off enough to give an easygoing presentation. I am genuinely surprised as to how much performance Moonriver have been able to extract from a design that relies upon Texas Instruments LM3886 power amplifier integrated circuits, but ultimately I suspect it's those chips that result in this amplifier not extracting the last bit of micro detail at its price point. I understand hand building amplifiers in Sweden isn't cheap, but I'd like to see a version of this amplifier with discrete power amplifier modules. Given the apparent quality of the power supply and preamp, the 404 reference deserves it. That amplifier may have to retail for $6 or $6.5 grand, but if well designed, there's every chance that it could compete with the Hegels, Accuphases and the Trilogy 921 amplifier that I reviewed at that price. As things stand, I have to judge the 404 reference as it is, and it's a little bit pricey at £4,500. At £3,000 to £3,500 it'd be more competitive, and that's the only reason why it's not rating higher. The Moonriver 404 reference gets a recommended from this channel. We're still early doors in 2025, so I'd like to get your recommendations in for amplifiers that you'd like to see me review. That's my question for today. What amplifiers would you like to see me review in 2025 and the reasons why? Please let me know in the comment section. I'm sure you know what to do by now. If you want to support me here on what I do, like, share, subscribe, hit the bell notification. Check me out on Patreon. There's a couple of tiers you can access there if you think I can help you on your audiophile journey. Also check out the ABA Club on Patreon, which has some great ways to interact with me and fellow Patrons. But for today, for now, a British audiophile signing off.